Is planning inevitable? It is revealing that few planners today are content to say that central planning is desirable. Most of them affirm that we now are compelled to do it by circumstances beyond our control. One argument frequently heard is that the complexity of modern civilization creates new problems which we cannot hope to deal with effectively except by central planning. This argument is based on a complete misapprehension of the working of competition. The very complexity of modern condition makes competition the only method by which a coordination of affairs can be adequately achieved. There would be no difficulty about the efficient control or planning were conditions so simple that a single person or board could effectively survey all the facts. But as the factors which have to be taken into account become numerous and complex, no one center can keep track of them. The constantly changing conditions of demand and supply of different commodities can never be fully known or quickly enough disseminated by any one center. Under competition and under no other economic order, the price system automatically records all the relevant data. Entrepreneurs, by watching the movement of comparatively few prices, as an engineer watches a few dials, can adjust their activities to those of their fellows. Compared with this method of solving economic problem by decentralization plus automatic coordination through the price system, the method of central direction is incredibly clumsy, primitive, and limited in scope. It is no exaggeration to say that if we had to rely on central planning for the growth of our industrial system, it would never have reached the degree of differentiation and flexibility it has attained. Modern civilization has been possible precisely because it did not have to be consciously created. The division of labor has gone far beyond what could have been planned. Any further growth in economic complexity, far from making central direction more necessary, makes it more important than ever that we should use the technique of competition and not depend on conscious control. It is also argued that technological changes have made competition impossible in a constantly increasing number of fields, and that our only choice is between control of production by private monopolies and the direction by the government. The growth of monopoly, however, seems not so much a necessary consequence of the advance of technology as the results of the policies pursued in most countries. The most comprehensive study of this situation is that by a temporary National Economic Committee, which certainly cannot be accused of any unduly liberal bias. The committee concludes, "The superior efficiency of large establishments has not been demonstrated. The advantages that are supposed to destroy competition have failed to manifest themselves in many fields. The conclusion that the advantage of large-scale production must lead inevitably to the abolition of competition cannot be accepted. It should be noted, moreover, that monopoly is frequently attained through collusive agreement and promoted by public policies. When these agreements are invalidated and these policies reversed, competition conditions can be restored." Anyone who has observed how aspiring monopolists regularly seek the assistance of the state to make their control effective can have little doubt that there is nothing inevitable about this development. In the United States, a highly protectionist policy aided the growth of monopolies. In Germany, the growth of cartels has since 1878 been systematically fostered by deliberate policy. It was here that, with the help of the state, the first great experiment in scientific planning and conscious organization of industry led to the creation of giant monopolies. The suppression of competition was a matter of deliberate policy in Germany, undertaken in the service of an ideal which we now call planning. Great danger lies in the policy of two powerful groups, organized capital and organized labor, which support the monopolistic organization of industry. The recent growth of monopoly is largely the result of deliberate collaboration of organized capital and organized labor, where the privileged groups of labor share in the monopoly profits at the expense of the community, and particularly at the expense of those employed in the less well-organized industries. However, there is no reason to believe that this movement is inevitable. The movement towards planning is the result of deliberate action. No external necessities force us to it. Can planning free us from care? Most planners who have seriously considered the practical aspects of their task have little doubt that a directed economy must be run on dictatorial lines, that the complex system of interrelated activities must be directed by staffs of experts, with ultimate power in the hands of a commander-in-chief, whose actions must not be fettered by democratic procedure. The consolation our planners offer us is that this authoritarian direction will apply only to economic matters. This assurance is usually accompanied by the suggestion that by giving up freedom in the less important aspects of our lives, we shall obtain freedom in the pursuit of higher values. On this ground, people who abhor the idea of political dictatorship often clamor for a dictator in the economic field. The arguments used appeal to our best instincts. If planning really did free us from less important cares, and so made it easier to render our existence one of plain living and high thinking, who would wish to belittle such an ideal? Unfortunately, purely economic ends cannot be separated from the other ends of life. What is misleadingly called the economic motive means merely the desire for general opportunity. If we strive for money, it is because money offers us the widest choice in enjoying the fruits of our efforts. Once earned, we are free to spend the money as we wish. Because it is through the limitation of our money incomes that we feel the restrictions which our relative poverty still imposes on us. Many have come to hate money as the symbol of these restrictions. Actually, money is the greatest instrument of freedom ever invented by men. It is money which in existing society opens an astounding range of choice to the poor man, a range greater than that which not many generations ago was open to the wealthy. We shall better understand the significance of the service of money if we consider what it would really mean if, as so many socialists characteristically propose, the pecuniary motive were largely displaced by non-economic incentives. If all rewards, instead of being offered in money, were offered in the form of public distinctions or privileges, positions of power over other men, better housing or food, opportunities for travel or education, this would merely mean that the recipient would no longer be allowed to choose, and for that whoever fixed the reward would determine not only its size, but the way in which it should be enjoyed. The so-called economic freedom which the planners promise us means precisely that we are to be relieved of the necessity of solving our own economic problems, and that the better choices which this often involves are to be made for us, since, under modern conditions, we are for almost everything dependent on means which our fellow men provide. Economic planning would involve direction of almost the whole of our life. There is hardly an aspect of it, from our primary needs to our relations with our family and friends, from the nature of our work and to the use of our leisure, over which the planner would not exercise his conscious control. The power of the planner over our private lives would be hardly less effective if the consumer were nominally free to spend his income as he pleased, for the authority would control production. Our freedom of choice in a competitive society rests on the fact that if one person refuses to satisfy our wishes, we can turn to another. But if we face a monopolist, we are at his mercy, and an authority directing the whole economic system would be the most powerful monopolist imaginable. It would have complete power to decide what we are to be given and on what terms. It would not only decide what commodities and services are to be available and in what quantities, it would be able to direct their distribution between districts and groups, and could, if it wished, discriminate between persons to any degree it liked. Not our own view, but somebody else's view of what we ought to like or dislike would determine what we should get. The will of the authority would shape and guide our daily lives even more in our position as producers. For most of us, the time we spend at our work is a large part of our whole lives, and our job usually determines the place where and the people among whom we live. Hence, some freedom in choosing our work is probably even more important for our happiness than freedom to spend our income during our hours of leisure. Even in the best of worlds, this freedom will be limited. Few people ever have an abundance of choice of occupation, but what matters is that we have some choice, that we are not absolutely tied to a job which has been chosen for us, and that if one position becomes intolerable, or if we had set our heart on another, there is always a way for the able at some sacrifice to achieve his goal. Nothing makes conditions more unbearable than the knowledge that no effort of ours can change them. It may be bad to be just a cog in the machine, but it is infinitely worse if we can no longer leave it, if we are tied to our place and to our superiors who have been chosen for us. In our present world, there is much that could be done to improve our opportunities of choice, but planning would surely go in the opposite direction. Planning must control the entry into the different trades and occupations, or the terms of remuneration, or both. In almost all known instances of planning, the establishment of such controls and restrictions was among the first measures taken. In a competitive society, most things can be had at a price. It is often a cruelly high price. We must sacrifice one thing to attain another. The alternative, however, is not a freedom of choice, but orders and prohibitions which must be obeyed. That people should wish to be relieved of the bitter choice which hard facts often impose on them is not surprising, but few want to be relieved through having the choice made for them by others. People just wish that the choice should not be necessary at all, and they are only too ready to believe that the choice is not really necessary, but that it is imposed on them merely by the particular economic system under which we live. What they resent is, in truth, that there is an economic problem. The wishful delusion that there really is no longer an economic problem has been furthered by the claim that a planned economy would produce a substantially larger output than the competitive system. This claim, however, is being progressively abandoned by most students of the problem. Even a good many economists with socialist views are now content to hope that a planned society will equal the efficiency of a competitive system. They advocate planning because it will enable us to secure more equitable distribution of wealth. And it is indisputable that if we want consciously to decide who is to have what, we must plan the whole economic system. But the question remains whether the price we should have to pay for the realization of somebody's ideal of justice is not bound to be more discontent and more oppression than was ever caused by the much abused free play of economic forces. For when a government undertakes to distribute the wealth, by what principles will it or ought it to be guided? Is there a definite answer to the innumerable questions of relative merits that will arise? Only one general principle, one simple rule, would provide such an answer: absolute equality of all individuals. If this were the goal, it would at least give the vague idea of distributive justice clear meaning. But people in general do not regard mechanical equality of this kind as desirable, and socialism promises not complete equality, but greater equality. This formula answers practically no questions. It does not free us from the necessity of deciding in every particular instance between the merits of particular individuals or groups, and it gives no help in that decision, and it tells us that in effect it is to take from the rich man as much as we can. When it comes to the distribution of the spoils of the problems, is the same as if the formula of greater equality had never been conceived. It is often said that political freedom is meaningless without economic freedom. This is true enough, but in a sense almost opposite from that in which the phrase is used by our planners. The economic freedom which is the prerequisite of any other freedom, cannot be the freedom from economic care which the socialists promise us, and which can be attained only by relieving us of the power of choice. It must be that freedom of economic activity which, together with the right of choice, carries also the risk and responsibility of that right. Two kinds of security. Like the spurious economic freedom, and with more justice, economic security is often represented as an indispensable condition of real liberty. In a sense, this is both true and important. Independence of mind or strength of character is rarely found among those who cannot be confident that they will make their way by their own effort. But there are two kinds of security: the certainty of a given minimum of sustenance for all, and the security of a given standard of life, of the relative position which one person or group enjoys compared with others. There is no reason why, in a society which has reached the general level of wealth ours has, the first kind of security should not be guaranteed to all without endangering general freedom. That is, some minimum of food, shelter, and clothing sufficient to preserve health. Nor is there any reason why the state should not help to organize a comprehensive system of social insurance in providing for those common hazards of life against which few can make adequate provision. It is the planning for security of the second kind which has such an insidious effect on liberty. It is planning designed to protect individuals or groups against diminutions of their incomes. If, as has been increasingly true, the members of each trade in which conditions improve are allowed to exclude others in order to secure to themselves the full gain in the form of higher wages or profits, those in the trades where demand has fallen off have nowhere to go, and every change results in large unemployment. There can be little doubt that it is largely a consequence of the striving for security by these means in the last decades that unemployment and thus insecurity have so much increased. The utter hopelessness of this position of those who in a society which has thus grown rigid are left outside the range of sheltered occupation can be appreciated only by those who have experienced it. There has never been a more cruel exploitation of one class by another than that of the less fortunate members of a group of producers by the well-established. This has been made possible by the regulation of competition. Few catchwords have done so much harm as the ideal of a stabilization of particular prices or wages, which, while securing the income of some, makes the position of the rest more and more precarious. In England and America, special privileges, especially in the form of the regulation of competition, the stabilization of particular prices and wages, have assumed increasing importance. With every grant of such security to one group, the insecurity of the rest necessarily increases. If you guarantee to some a fixed part of a variable cake, the share left to the rest is bound to fluctuate proportionally more than the size of the whole. And the essential element of security which the competitive system offers, the great variety of opportunities, is more and more reduced. The general endeavor to achieve security by restrictive measures, supported by the state, has, in the course of time, produced a progressive transformation of society, a transformation in which, as in so many other ways, Germany has led, that other countries have followed. This development has been hastened by another effect of socialist teaching, the deliberate disparagement of all activities involving economic risk and the moral opprobrium cast on the gains which make risks worth taking, but which only few can win. We cannot blame our young men when they prefer the safe salaried position to the risk of enterprise after they have heard from their earliest youth the former described as the superior, the more unselfish, disinterested occupation. The younger generation of today has grown up in a world in which, in school and press, the spirit of commercial enterprise has been represented as disreputable and the making of profit as immoral. where to employ 100 people is represented as exploitation, but to command the same number is honorable. Older people may regard this as exaggeration, but the daily experience of the university teacher leaves little doubt that, as a result of anti-capitalist propaganda, values have already altered far in advance of the change in institutions which has so far taken place. The question is whether, by changing our institutions to satisfy the new demands, we shall not unwittingly destroy values which we still rate higher. The conflict with which we have to deal with is a fundamental one between two irreconcilable types of social organization, which have often been described as the commercial and the military. In either, both choice and risk rest with the individual, or he is relieved of both. In the army, work and worker alike are allotted by authority, and this is the only system in which the individual can be conceded full economic security. This security is, however, inseparable from the restrictions on liberty and the hierarchical orders of military life. It is the security of the barracks. In a society used to freedom, it is unlikely that many people would ready deliberately to purchase security at this price, but the policies which are followed now are nevertheless rapidly creating conditions in which the striving for security tends to become stronger than the love of freedom. If we are not to destroy individual freedom, competition must be left to function unobstructed. Let a uniform minimum be secured to everybody by all means, but let us admit at the same time that all claims for a privileged security of particular classes must lapse, that all excuses disappear for allowing particular groups to exclude newcomers from sharing their relative prosperity in order to maintain a special standard of their own. There can be no question that adequate security against severe privation will have to be one of our main goals of policy. But nothing is more fatal than the present fashion of intellectual leaders of extolling security at the expense of freedom. It is essential that we should relearn, frankly, to face the fact that freedom can be had only at a price, that as individuals we must be prepared to make severe material sacrifices to preserve it. We must regain the conviction on which liberty in the Anglo-Saxon countries has been based, and which Benjamin Franklin expressed in a phrase applicable to us as individuals no less than as nations. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Toward a better world. To build a better world, we must have the courage to make a new start. We must clear away the obstacles with which human folly has recently encumbered our path and release the creative energy of individuals. We must create conditions favorable to progress rather than planning progress. It is not those who cry for more planning who show the necessary courage, nor those who preach a new order, which is no more than a continuation of the tendencies of the past 40 years. And who can think of nothing better than to imitate Hitler? It is indeed those who cry loudest for a planned economy who are most completely under the sway of the ideas which have created this war and the most of the evils with which we suffer. The guiding principle in any attempt to create a world of free men must be this: a policy of freedom for the individual is the only truly progressive policy.